I think when the Cardinals had that stretch of 2 weeks where they went on their run about a month ago or so, and they beat good teams, they won series, at least I kind of thought, like, all right, the Cardinals are back. Mm-hmm. All right, we're gonna see them for the rest of the season. Then they come back to life, and then, okay, you win that first game against the Reds, and I'm just thinking in my head, okay, is this the time now where the Cardinals get right again? And maybe they still do. I don't know. I just feel like at what point do we stop saying this is the Cardinals that always come back? They always have a good second half. It's the Cardinals of the last 15, 20 years. They're always good. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And at what point in the season do we start to just say, man, this team's just not very good?
Yeah, and and the crazy thing about it is that you start to see more pieces come back into the lineup. Some of the guys you're dependent on, they were winning without the ones that you thought would be in the mix. So let me throw the lineup out here for today real quick. So you've got Brendan Donovan leading off at first. Goldschmidt's doing DH duty second. Then you've got Gorman, Arenado, Contreras, Dylan Carlson in the sixth spot in front of Jordan Walker, who's in left field, which I like. Paul DeJong, and then Tommy Edman in center. Not exactly – I mean, a lot of the faces and the names that you thought would be in there, maybe in some different spaces. But one would think, if you're going to turn this thing around, if you're going to get going, this is the type of lineup, right, that you would say, this is the one that can do it. But it still feels roughly the same as it did, a month ago, where it's been a team that's lived two completely different realities. Either they've been surging like they were in the time that you're talking about, or it's been these long losing streaks or these days where they just can't get right. And you would think that being able to play a team like the Reds would be a situation where you can get together. But the Reds are a young team that's playing with house money, and they don't seem to care. They're just going after it.
Sneaky good hitting team. They're 11th in batting average.
I would love to see their splits on what that looks like away from home and on the road, because when you've got a young team like that and you've got a park like Great American, great place to have that at. But, Busch usually doesn't tend to lean itself into huge offensive days. But Adam Wainwright's pitching today.
There we go. And that's where perfect segue. Because I thought as the Cardinals were really bad for the first month, 6 weeks, to me it was obvious. Your starting pitching was not giving you a chance to win. And I've always thought, or I did in the offseason, and even when the offense was struggling, they went off on that 2 week span. You saw them score 18 and 16 and 10, and for a while they were top 5-ish in runs and OPS. And I mean, I haven't looked in a couple days. This week when I looked, I think they were 7th. They're starting to fall off as the offense isn't producing at all. Mm-hmm. But I think the last couple weeks, I think what's craziest about that is the starting rotation has been really, really good until yesterday. I mean, finally, we asked for the starting pitching to start delivering winnable starts, and they've done it for a couple weeks, and the offense just went missing in action.
Yeah, and you just can't. It's one of those years where the more and more we go down the road, I just wonder if things ever get on the same page. Because, there's a shelf life to this whole thing. Mo had the comments about buying versus selling and whatnot about a week or so ago. And, since that time, things fell off the side of the table again. So it's a weird – this isn't a team that's going to sell. The Cardinals just don't sell off. I don't see that happening.
What if they're 10 back?
I mean, but who do you – I mean, you're not going to see Arenado go. You're not going to see Goldschmidt
Flaherty.
go.
It's going to have to be O'Neill, Burleson.
Montgomery.
It's got to be a bottom end.
But
Hicks.
That's the issue. Now,
I'm talking about
Hicks I can see.
Guys that are free agents to be, which would be Hicks, Monty, Flaherty. I think in O'Neill he has a year and a half, but still – I think Burleson would be a nice piece because long-term you wonder what his role is. Carlson, if Carlson gets healthy here and is productive, I still think no matter who you're picking, they have too many outfielders.
Yeah.
You eventually have to make some tough decisions and sort that out.
There's a smaller list of guys that aren't going anywhere. Goldschmidt, Arenado, Walker, Nootbaar. I just don't see it happening. I kind of honestly, I mean, Contreras, obviously. I kind of don't see a world where Tommy Edman goes anywhere, especially with as many roles as he's filling for the club right now. Gorman, obviously, isn't going anywhere. But, yeah, the problem is that a lot of those other folks that you look at if you get into a sell situation is you're selling them off at the very bottom of where their value's at. And maybe you're at a point where you just have to make room on the roster. because you didn't do it in the offseason. But that's why it goes back to me. And our friends Jim Thomas and Ben Fredrickson had a video that they did on STL Today earlier this week talking about, it might not be the time to be saying what you are one way or the other as far as the Cardinals. And also they were talking about whose fault is this? Is this Ollie's fault? Is it Mo's fault?
All the above.
Well, the more and more I go into it, it feels a lot more like the latter than the former to me.
How about the players, too?
Yeah.
You got produced.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, that's the point that I wanted to get to with it is that when I look at this team, there's not a lot of great trade value that I see in it. But also, what are you going out to get? I mean, are you going to go and buy a bunch of things when you're 7 games out? I mean, what does that mean? So it really just falls down to saying this is the team you got. Who's going to do it? Who's going to step up and make it happen?
So yesterday, I'm watching that game, and Miles Michaelis had a very rough start. You also had bad defense. And I was watching the post game, and if you guys saw that on Bally Sports Midwest, Miles Michaelis was super short. He wasn't necessarily disrespectful, but you could tell he was super frustrated. So any question, I have to be better. What happened? I was bad overall. So I'm like, all right. And that's, to me, kind of entertaining, too, when you just have those short answers. He's clearly frustrated. But then, after several questions about his pitching, where he owned it. He didn't make excuses. I was bad. I got to be better, blah, blah, blah. But then when somebody asked him about Tommy Edman and the catch in center, he finally had that long answer, which I appreciated because he was frustrated with himself. And I get that, and that's fine. You're an athlete. You're disappointed. But then when he was asked about Tommy Edman, he had this very long answer showing that dude mad props because he has bounced all over the frickin' field over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Second, obviously, Gold Glove. Short. Should have been a Gold Glover last year in that utility spot, I thought.
Yeah, me
Brendan
too.
Donovan got it, but whatever. I'm not gonna complain too much.
Weird.
But now he's making, honestly, I don't want to say Jim Edmonds, but damn near close to those type of catches
John Jay.
in center field.
He's fantastic, and I think he's been probably the guy on the team that's been the most overlooked, I would say, over the past few years because he kind of still had that rep of being a guy that bounced around and filled in where he was needed as opposed to being a guy that was set into the lineup and you build around him. I think you got to turn it around and look at things a little differently, though, is that that's what his value is, though, is that he's one of the elite utility guys in all of baseball. I mean, you saw, I think that probably the first guy that really broke this role in modern times how it's leveraged is Ben Zobrist in Tampa and what he did down there. The plan was for him to play everywhere. The plan wasn't for him just to, I guess by trade he was a second baseman. But, I mean, I think he played everywhere on the field except for catcher one year. I mean, that's a hell of a thing to have. Now, you can't have 4 guys like that because then you've got a roster issue.
That's what they have, though.
Exactly. And that goes back to where the issue is at with the team.
And that's why I think it's confusing, but it's also fascinating. What John Mozeliak needs to do, not just for this year, but for next year and the next couple years, there are so many position players that I like as hitters in theory, but I don't know where to play them and where they should play. And some of the big studs, for example, Nolan Gorman. Well, he might be a decent third baseman. He might be a decent first baseman. Who knows? I mean, he can play second. I don't know if you love him there all the time. If you look at defensive numbers, the second base position for the Cardinals is not elite at all. I was looking at Fielding Bible the other day. Jordan Walker, you love his upside. You love his bat. You certainly don't love him right now in the outfield. And again, long term, I think this dude's going to be, he's 6'6". He's going to carry 260, 270, not in a bad way, but I think he profiles as a first baseman.
Yeah.
Well, Goldie's here for at least a year and a half. How long Arenado? 4 years? So, I mean, Walker comes up as a third baseman. Gorman should be a third baseman. Tommy Edman is the perfect super utility man. You don't love Gorman at second. You wanted one of these outfielders or a couple of them to just grab a spot and say, this is my spot, whether it's center or I'm going to play every day in the corners. Everybody's been hurt. Everybody's been underperforming. Walker got sent down. I think we thought at least the first month we could figure out where people are going to play, and we're over 60 games in, and there's still, to me, there's no answered questions about who should play where most nights and where they should hit.
Well, and I think that what you hope is that you've had a couple of guys that have made their returns in and have had the impact with opportunity. For a little while, it was Paul DeJong, who's tailed off some now. You have Dylan Carlson come back yesterday, 3 hits. I mean, that's a great turn around for him. Maybe he starts to solidify something for himself there and does that.
Or to be traded.
Well, exactly. I mean, if that's the move that you make, that's all good. I mean, I think that if you're going to move an outfielder, he's probably the one that people would be most interested in on this team right now that you're willing to move. I mean, obviously, Newbar and Walker aren't in the mix, but maybe that's a guy that somebody is.
I think the guy that Charlie just described is O'Neill, the guy that needs to solidify a spot. I know he's hurt, but I know he bats .230. I at least enjoy having him out in left field, and he's going to make the routine plays and more.
I mean, my only thing with O'Neill is that in order to make routine plays, you got to play. I mean, and so he brings absolutely no value right now because he's not playing. And if you're talking about trying to retool this team right now in the run of the season, you can't trade him for anything. It's just not there. So the big issue that I've got with that is that if you're another team and you're looking at what you could potentially deal with the Cardinals on, is that who you're calling about?
Yeah, and that's the thing with O'Neill is, look, I think it makes sense to move him. I don't think you're going to get almost anything in return. And then, so if you're a Cardinals fan driving around right now, by the way, come on down to the St. Louis European Auto Show. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. But if you're driving around in your car right now and you're saying, yeah, I think we should hold on to Tyler O'Neill, the only reason I'm saying this is because he's been hurt all year. You're not going to get anything in return. And at minimum, I guess, you could just hope and pray. Now, you shouldn't count on it. But you could hope and pray that next year, in his walk year, happens to be that 1 in every 4 years for him where he's actually healthy and productive. But you can't count on that. I mean, whatsoever.
At this point, for me, with Tyler O'Neill is that if you could move him for a reliever, I'm happy with that.
I agree with you.
Doesn't even have to be
a big league reliever that can help.
Yeah,
yes.
Just get me somebody with a year left on their deal. If we can trade service time out for service time for somebody that just needs to add another outfielder into the mix, I'm all for it.
How about this? I got a good example for you. And I don't know if this name will not excite anybody, but I think it's a good way to let everybody know that you probably shouldn't be excited about what you're going to get for Tyler O'Neill. What if he's a Chris Stratton type?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so last year you got a year and a half of Chris Stratton. I think, isn't that probably his value? Is that fair-ish?
I'm all good with that. I would even go another direction.
Just a reliever, not necessarily a great or good reliever, just a guy.
Let's say somebody's got a contract on a reliever that they're like, oh, man, we might have overspent a little bit here and do that. The Cardinals have got payroll room. They should, at least, according to what the plan was coming into the year. Can you absorb a contract, then move a Jordan Hicks and try to some way get your return back for Tyler O'Neill via a proxy of trades where you get something back as a part of a different deal, but you move this one out to make room? I just think they've got to make you got to make room in this roster, and by bringing back O'Neill and Carlson and Newbar and Walker, and I mean, what are you doing at that point? You just can't do it.
Right, and that's where I just think a change of scenery for Tyler O'Neill makes sense for both parties, but also if he's just a bench bat next year, kind of on the cheap, a guy who's your fourth outfielder, all I'm saying is they need to move two of those guys, whoever it is. You just need to pick. You need to make a decision, whether it's Dylan Carlson and Alec Burleson, whether it's Tyler O'Neill and Dylan Carlson. Pick whoever it is, and even for this year, but certainly for next year, you can't come in with the same glut. You need to basically have some subtraction there just so the roster is not so discombobulated.
You've got to I think you've got to move out 3 to 4 guys that are on it right now. 3 probably is more realistic because it's not like glut is just left in the outfield. So before I talk about the infield, right now, say the Cardinals are going to turn it on 2 months, which they truly would have to. What is the outfield that gets that done based on the pieces that you've got in play if you're the one that's setting the lineup? Charlie Marlow's getting the card.
Well, right now, okay, so with Nootbaar, when Nootbaar comes back, I like Lars Nootbaar.
Where at?
Anywhere, just playing. I don't mind if he's a little bit of center field. If Carlson is healthy, I like him more in center field, but also I think he might be moved. Jordan Walker, I think at this point, because he was already sent down, you mess with him. I don't think you can mess with him too much.
No.
So at this point, I think you need to deal with him being a below-average outfielder and let him figure it out and let him hit.
Yeah. Okay. So Jordan Walker, I think you got to tuck in right field. I just think that that's where he's got to be. I I would love Carlson in center. I think he makes things a lot easier doing that. I'm still going to be until there's nothing left for me to give to it or I don't care anymore about what Dylan Carlson does. He's got to give up the switch hitting. He just has to. He's two completely different players on each side of the plate. Like, focus in on what you do well. Minimize things. Make it simpler. And then in left, I would love Lars in left. I mean, if you could get that outfield for you and then you've got a Edman in there, maybe you get a Mercado in the mix, however that looks. Like, I'm okay with that. I mean, you can even throw Brendan Donovan out there if you need to. But that goes back into the other glut. You got Gorman. You got Donovan. You got Edman. You got DeYoung. You got too much.
And we're having two conversations here. We're having this year's conversation, and we're having the next year or the next couple years conversation where you would hope that Mason Wynn is a big part of next year. And that's where, even though I love Tommy Edman, you can't have three super utility dudes.
No.
Right? You have Brendan Donovan. You have Tommy Edman. I'm even going to throw right now Nolan Gorman. He's such a great bat, but he's a second base. He can play third when Arenado's getting his DH time. You just have a lot of dudes who are kind of the same. And this is where I think certainty helps. It certainly helps a manager. If a manager on any given night can just look at his lineup and say, you know what, 6 or 7 guys, I know where they should be playing defensively. And then every night we might tinker with a couple of them based on matchups. The Cardinals are the opposite. Mm-hmm. I feel like they have about 3 dudes that you feel good about in their defensive position, and you're juggling the other 6 to figure out where they should play defensively on a given night.
Yeah, I mean, and so that's the issue. I think that then you start to get into the contract situation at that point. Tommy Edman's going to be due some coin here, if not this offseason, the next one. Brendan Donovan, however, you got more leash on that, and you deal with that. So, some of these guys that you've had up that have been clearing things up have made sense because they also don't cost you a lot to carry. So the DH spot is big. I still, I think I agree with you. I think long-term Jordan Walker is your first baseman, good athlete, guy that should be able to take that on. But this is also a guy that's 20 years old, that was drafted as a third baseman, who was adapted to the outfield, and now would move to another new position, all in the span of, 3 to 4 years?
Well, I wouldn't do that with him until an offseason. You have to figure out what's up with Paul Goldschmidt. And I know some people are talking about Paul Goldschmidt might be traded. I just don't see that happening because the Cardinals want to win next year.
Right.
So even if they don't re-sign Paul Goldschmidt to an extension at the end that they probably shouldn't do, that they might do, by the way, why would you not? I mean, Paul Goldschmidt is still pushing 900 OPS, and he's under contract for next year. The Cardinals, they're never going to do a tank job where they do this full rebuild. So let's say they move on from Paul Goldschmidt after next year. That's where, to me, you let Jordan Walker or whoever. Nolan Gorman could be a first baseman. But if it's Jordan Walker, you let him know after that year, hey, take the whole offseason, take your outfield glove and throw it away, and you're a first baseman, and give him the entire offseason and in the entirety of spring training to become a first baseman. Not in the middle of the season.
That Goldschmidt conversation, I want to come back to that. I know we got a little
something
now,
either way.
No. I want to come back to that because that's we've been here before. We've been here recently when you got a guy that's pushing. Now, he wasn't an MVP. He was a big contributor.
Matt Carpenter.
We've been there. We've seen this.
The difference, though, is that, I mean, this is where I think it's funny about Goldschmidt. And I understand you can, with this team in last place, you can make a case to trade anyone. To me, it's always about what do the Cardinals usually do, which is why I don't think they'll trade Paul Goldschmidt. The difference is Paul Goldschmidt, we forget, won the freaking MVP last year.
Yeah.
And again, I haven't looked lately.
He's going to be an all-star this year, too, by the way.
He's pushing 900 OPS. Matt Carpenter fell off the face of the earth for 2.5 years. Matt Carpenter literally should not have had a roster spot for a couple years, except for the fact that he had the contract. I mean, Matt Carpenter was awful.
Yeah.
Paul Goldschmidt was the damn MVP last year.
Yeah, it would be the same thing as saying that, I don't know, we're going to continue to force this Paul DeYoung situation down your throat, and you got a nice little boost for that for a second, but now that's starting to come back to the world too, which goes into, again, what I say about the value of the guys you've got on your roster. I mean, that's a contract that I think teams would take on or might deal with, but you also have to move these guys at a point. You got to do something. You got to do something, and they seem very, very dedicated to just waiting and seeing.
And that's where, so you make a great point there, because I think a good word is languishing. All these outfielders and all these position players, because you didn't make a tough decision this offseason or last offseason, you did have a ton of players that at different times in their development had tremendous value. Tyler O'Neill, coming off his 8th in the MVP, obviously had tremendous value at that point. Dylan Carlson, I still think has more value, but a couple years ago, he had way more value. Alec Burleson, I'm not going to say he can't be a big league hitter, but coming off last year in the minors, he had more value. So I also think by not making a decision, you weren't able to trade a lot of these guys or any of them when their value is high. And now all of Major League Baseball has seen them struggle, seen them get hurt, and you're not going to get nearly as much in return as you could have a year or 2 years ago.
So, and it goes back to the thing, tell people all the time that they are that fans don't let things like the Randy Arozarena thing go and stuff like that. Well, front offices don't either. And you've seen that since some of those trades happened, they've been pretty, in my opinion, pretty determined to not make the same mistake twice. So when you see Aroldis Garcia and you see Arozarena, if you pop those two guys into this lineup,
Alcantara, Gallen,
absolutely. My difference with those deals are with Gallen and Alcantara, who are in the same deal, is that was the first time the Cardinals made a trade, a noteworthy high price trade since Matt Holliday, and they got away with theft to get him because Oakland just had to get the contract off. Miami was like, we're trading everybody, and we're going to get all sorts of stuff for it. But that was the first time they made that deal, and basically it came down between Alcantara and Flaherty, and that was what that deal looked like. You don't hear very much come up about the Goldschmidt deal. You know why? Because nobody cares about what Carson Kelly or Luke Weaver's doing. But when you give up a couple of guys like that, it's a big deal. When you give up an Arozarena, who goes on and becomes one of the greatest World Series performers and an all-star this year of all time, you feel that. When you see what Garcia's come, who was maybe the 6th outfielder in the mix at that time, who got maybe how many games did he play up here? Maybe 20 maybe? Like, it burns differently. But that doesn't mean that shoe fits forever. And that means that you hold on to all these other guys because you don't want to make the same mistake twice.
That's a great point that I think we don't talk about enough, is that them being burned in the Randy Arozarena deal and in the Marcell Ozuna trade, it does seem like it's lingering to the point where they're a little gun-shy to trade anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone.
Exactly, and that's what you see right now. Now, you look at what was asked for. I think you still have to have your standards. So when you talk about the Sean Murphy deal that could have happened, you saw the names that came out around that, and say you don't want to trade Lars. Well, Lars has played well this year when he's played. And you see Gorman, who was a guy he came in. Gorman is a guy that I think is in a different situation than all those other players, though. This was a first-round pick, a guy that's still coming into who he's going to be, and now he's getting his first chance to really be what he could be. Bottom line is, if you scout like the Cardinals do, you're going to have 35 guys that can probably play in the majors in your system at any given time. Problem is, you don't need all of them, but you got to make the right decisions about the ones that you don't.
And here's where I think we always focus on trades where one team gets just murdered in the trade. So if you're talking about the Cardinals, you can go, hey, John Mozeliak absolutely it was highway robbery to get Goldschmidt and to get Nolan Arenado. On the other side, the Cards got robbed in Randy Arozarena. We would think right now, we'll see with Liberatore, but you'd think right now, and then the Marcell Ozuna deal. I feel like we don't talk enough, not just baseball but sports. There are fair trades, and sometimes you can make a fair trade because you lack a certain position and have depth at a different position. So, for example, as great as Nolan Gorman is, if you go back in time, now I don't think this would have got it done, but if you traded Nolan Gorman and Alec Burleson, let's say, for Sean Murphy, that's actually a pretty fair trade.
Oh, it's a
Sean
great
Murphy
trade.
is awesome, and it's hard to find catchers. As good as Nolan Gorman is with a bat, he is positionally blocked here, and he's not a great defender. If you'd have basically flipped a star in Gorman and a bench-type guy in Burleson for a Sean Murphy, that type of deal, that would have been a pretty fair deal.
Well, and you also keep $80+ million in your kitty that you can use maybe on the rotation,
right?
Perhaps, but you can't go back and relitigate that now. They made the decision that they made, and it is what it is. But what you also have to do is to look at both sides of the situation, and to acquire Nolan Gorman and Paul Goldschmidt for basically the cost of Luke Weaver, Carson Kelly, and Austin Gomber, and you get $50 million coupon that comes back with it. Maybe karma says you got to lose a couple trades if you're going to get that in too.
That's fair. Seth,
we talk about quality of trades all the time, right? Everyone talks about how the Cardinals got a steal with Goldschmidt and Arenado, and then the ones where we got bagged on where it was a Rosarena and a Dulce. This year specifically, I think is timing. They all, Mike Claiborne always says, your team is what it is by Flag Day. That's when you can start.
When is that? Is that
That's
today?
Wednesday.
June 14th.
It's Wednesday.
This coming? Okay.
So now we can officially start fairly criticizing the team, right? We can say, okay, this team maybe they're not just playing down to.
We started that
other
months
teams'
ago,
level.
Seth. Come on now.
Yeah, I know. We started it back in February.
Remember, this is the program of accountability, and we've been consistent with that.
This is this year specifically is about timing, right? I don't think this year the Cardinals can wait until late July, right around the deadline, to make a move to stay afloat. They need to make a deal by the end of June, in my opinion. That's the only way I think that they're really gonna take that next level of this weak division and hurdle teams like the Brewers. And
it's tough when you're in. The facts of the matter are you're in last place and you're making a trade to go for it. They are in a weird situation where you've got to make moves for next year and try to figure out how to do that. I mean, I wouldn't be mad trying to trade some of those pieces, trying to even dig down into your minor league kitty some, and going out and trying to get a guy that maybe you can get low as well, like a Dylan Covey, or go and find somebody that, would you think the Braves might be interested in Mike Soroka, who's not doing very well for right now? Like, do you go and try to get an opportunity trade right now?
Here's what's interesting. I was checking the standings. So this morning, you're 7 games out in the division. You're 7 games out in the wild card. And I was on our buddies, Joe Davis, Cole Bartemus. I was on Cover 2. We were talking about on Friday.
Great job, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you. It was fun. And so we were talking about what the Cardinals might do at the trade deadline. And I kind of said, all right, if they're 5 games out, they're going to add something. I'm not saying it's going to be blockbuster, but they're going to add a reliever, maybe a starter. If they're 5 games out. I said, now if they're 10 games out, I think it actually makes sense for the first time in years to sell off short-term assets. Monty, Flaherty, Hicks, potentially a Tyler O'Neill, etc. So here's probably what's going to happen. They're going to be in the same weird spot as they are today. They're going to be, Matt, 7-ish games out. You're right there in freaking no man's land.
It's weird. I mean, and what do you do there? Because, I mean, the point that I make, when we bring it all full circle, is that usually when you hear about a club selling off, I mean, you're seeing everything go. Like, you're trying to get up in the draft. You're trying to change everything about your team. The Cardinals aren't a team that's trying to be in the top 10 of the draft. Period.
Ever.
Because at the end of the day, the business of what happens here matters still as well. So how do you maneuver this? Unfortunately, you've got to do the work you should have been doing in December and January, now in the middle of the year, because whether you like it or not, the guys need to play better. They need to do more. But also, at the end of the day, you're stuck in the reality you're stuck in now. Unless you want to be here again next year, start doing what you can to make up for what didn't happen.